Hello everyone, I'm Heather Peterson and welcome to the Rose Garden Sew Along. We're here in my studio today as we kick off our sew along. We are going to be making either the Midnight Rose Garden pattern. You can see we've got an option with the navy background and one with the cream, and we also have the Rose Garden Runner, which you can make as a double version or a single, and the sew along is going to cover all of these options. These patterns were designed to go with my Market Street collection, which came out last month. So these are the fabrics that I'm going to be using as I make my step outs for us for our sew along. And the pattern was actually inspired by the main floral from the collection. So do you see the roses and the leaves kind of coming out from there? That kind of inspired the rose and leaf design that's in our main quilt and in the runner. So I'm going to walk you through how our sew along is going to work and a little note about our schedule. So I'm going to be posting videos on my YouTube channel. So if you're a subscriber, you'll be getting notification, and if you have your notifications on, you'll be getting notifications on when these videos go live. They're going to be on Thursdays. And if you've signed up for my email list, then you will automatically get an email that has a link to the video that you can just click on and walk through making our whatever step we're doing for that day. And those videos will remain on my YouTube channel, so you can work on them at any time. So there's no rush that you have to stay with us each week, but you can if you want to. It's a good way to stay accountable. And let me just hold this up. This is our schedule. If you want to screenshot that, it's got what we're going to be doing on each week. Now this fabric came out in October, and the box kits for this project and the runner that we're going to do, we're supposed to be here in November, and I didn't want to start a big sew along during the holidays. So what I'm going to do is this week I'm going to walk you through the cutting and the fabric planning, and you'll have a chance to gather all your supplies and work on that cutting, and then hopefully you'll finish that during the month of December, and then we'll meet again on January 4th, and then after that each Thursday we're going to be doing a step in the pattern, and that was on this info here. And if you lose this info, it is listed on my website. I will put that link in the description below, so you can click on that if you want to. Then let's talk about how you can get your patterns. You know, you can get these from your favorite shop, or you can order them directly from me. They are available in PDF form or paper form. And if you want help with picking out your fabrics, these are also available as box kits from Riley Blake. So this is the runner kit. You would get the option with the navy background. On my website, I also am offering it with the cream background. You just wouldn't get it in the cute little box. But if you prefer those fabrics, they're options. And I also have these two versions as well as a couple others. So let's take a closer look at those. This is the runner version that's in the box kit. You can see this is a big oversized runner. There's your big rose there. This kit uses my Gingham Cottage collection, so you can get that kit on my website if you like those fabrics. And this is what the size of the single rose version is. And this very dramatic version with the black background is done using my Winter Wonder collection. So this kit is on my website as well. I am currently working on making some of the runners that are using the actual Market Street fabrics. You know, I just got these, so I don't have everything ready yet, but I'm working on piecing and making my videos. So that's one of the color combinations. This is the little cream background that's from Market Street that will be used for that. And if you're interested in the navy version, this is what's in that boxed kit. So you can see there's the navy background. Those are the prints that are in the roses. That's the one that's in here. Now, if you're looking for the easier option for our sew along, this version is the simplest of all the versions I'm going to show you. If you want a little bit more advanced, then you can make the single rose version, where I will go through how to make the stem. That's the little bit more challenging part of the construction. And then if you want to do the more advanced challenge version, that would be this one. So the part that makes this one a little bit more advanced is the fact that it's more involved. There's a lot more cutting. It's a lot bigger, more steps. Making that stem with the bias edges, we'll go over a few tricks for how to do that. And then the construction of the quilt is made in a big diagonal section like this, and then two like that. So there's quite a few bias edges and different sizes and things to keep track of, but I will walk you through every step of the way on that one. And if you want that more advanced version, that also comes as a boxed kit. You can see all the fabric and the pattern. The pattern does come in the boxed kit, so if you're getting the boxed kit, you don't need to order an additional pattern. That will come with this version that's made specifically for the kit. Then let me show you a couple other color options for that big version. I've made this large one using the Winter Wonder fabric. And I will post links to pictures since it's hard for me to hold up these big ones by myself. But you can see here a little bit closer what those fabrics and prints look like. And I also have a springy version. This one is using my Gingham Cottage collection. So let's do a little close-up of that one as well. See, there's some of those prints. And the roses are kind of coral and red. So those are the samples that I have to share with you in the different colors that I have for options. So you'll want to figure out which of those options you're going to do. You're going to want to find your pattern. You're going to want to print off our schedule. And then next I will show you a video walking you through the supplies that I have handy. And then following that, we'll have a video where I'll walk you through a little bit of the cutting so you can get going on our assignment for this month. Okay, let's quickly go over some supplies that you'll need for this sew along. First of all, you'll need an assortment of rulers. I have a 6x12 here, a 6x24, and also a big 15-inch square ruler. The big square is helpful for cutting the big background pieces on the big quilt. And in fact, this isn't quite big enough for cutting some of those squares, so we're going to use two rulers together, and I'll talk about that later. So you'll need several for this project. You also need your favorite trim scissors. You'll need a marking pen. I'm using this friction pen. Just make sure that whatever you use has a very fine tip, and this one is erasable by ironing over it. You don't want to use like a ballpoint pen or something that will bleed as you steam or as your project gets wet. So this one is a safe product to be using for this. I also like to use the small 28mm rotary cutting. When you're doing all the small little pieces that we're going to be working with, this is much easier to cut with than a large rotary cutter. If you like to use seam-align glue or pins, you'll need those. We also have a rotary cutter, and because we're doing a lot of folded corners, you'll need whatever tool you use to use folded corners. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but this is the 1/4-inch seam tape that a lot of people like to use, and I usually draw lines, so I have a pen for that. You'll also need thread. You'll need your rotary mat. I also have this rotating trim mat here, which I find helpful for squaring up small pieces. And then I also have my little project boards here. These are made by Riley Blake. And because this project has a lot of steps and a lot of blocks, I will oftentimes cut and lay out all the pieces I need for, say, the steps for making one flower and put them on one board, and the steps for another block on another board, and that helps me stay organized. I also have some starch laying out. I don't usually starch my pieces, but if you are one who starches, you can have that handy. This is a board for pressing your seams open, so you may also need that. It's not required, but I just mention it. And also you're going to need your sewing machine and your iron and several of those other basics. I'm going to be using my Maven Reliable Iron because I like to steam with my projects. And so I've got that set out and ready to go as well. Now we'll move over to the cutting instructions. All right, let's talk a little bit about the cutting before we get over to the cutting table. So I'm going to start with the table runner versions. We'll talk about the cutting on that first. This is the pattern that you would get if you ordered from me or from another shop, but not in the box kit. This one has both versions, the double and the single. If you're getting the box kit that I showed earlier, that one only has the double rose version. So I'm going to be referring to the different sizes on this. I think the main thing that I would like to point out is if you open the pattern, there are general instructions at the top that you're going to want to read through before you get started. And at the top, it says in the size options, The numbers for the cutting and sewing for the single rows version are listed first, followed by the double rows in parentheses. So that just means when you see things like this where there are two numbers, the first one is for the single rows and then the parentheses is for the double rows. So you might want to go through your pattern and just circle which size you're making so you don't end up double cutting on something and running short on fabric. And then as you're cutting, you're going to want to label. I list in red here the step sizes. If you label all those ahead of time, it's going to save you getting those pieces mixed up later when you're assembling, especially if you're working on the big quilt. There are many, many different sizes to keep track of, and I think labeling ahead will help with that. Now in this pattern, the cutting for the colored prints is here. It's all very basic, just squares and rectangles. I'm not going to go over how to cut all of those and do any beginning cutting instructions. I'm just pointing out where it is. And then for cutting the background, the single rows version is here in the top box. The double rows version, cutting the background, is here in this second box. So just make sure that you start cutting the right box when you're starting that. If you're doing the box kit version, that pattern looks just a little bit differently, but it's got the same thing where we've got some general instructions here, and then we've got our cutting instructions below in that gray box. Then if you are doing the big version, let me grab those two patterns here. This is the pattern that's going to come in the box kit, and this is the pattern that I published as a single pattern that you can get separately without the fabric. So they are slightly different, but the cutting is pretty involved for the big quilt. So I'm just going to walk you through a little bit. The colored prints are listed first. So this is on page 2. That's this section right here. Again, there are little steps in red, so you can label all your pieces and get them organized by step. And then at the bottom of this page, we're going to start cutting the background fabric. So it starts on the bottom of page 2, and it continues on pages 3 and 4 here. And then there is a cutting chart below. So you can refer to that as you're cutting these pieces and check them off as you go. But this just shows you how it would be laid out on the yardage. And if you want to cut in the order I have listed, that is the most efficient use of the fabric. And if you cut in the order I have listed, you'll be cutting the big pieces first, followed by the small pieces. So that way, if you screw up on one of those big pieces, hopefully you're still going to have enough fabric left to recut and then save those scraps to cut some of the smaller pieces. Then on the next page, there is another set of cutting instructions, and that's also background fabric, and that pertains to this diagram right here. If you have the box kit, this little line right here was inserted in error. We went through the whole testing process, didn't have that line there, and I don't know how I ended up getting that in there on the very last copy, but it should not be here. It is correct on this page. Do you see over here that D does not have a line through like it does here? So just pay attention to that if you're doing that cutting. If you are doing the pattern from me, I do not have those cutting charts shown in the pattern. It is correct as listed, and the reason I ended up eliminating those cutting charts is that how this works with the printer and how I do my printing, where I print them booklet style like this as opposed to separate pages like the other pattern. But you have to print in multiples of 4 and 8 and 16. And how this worked out is that if I included those 2 pages with the diagram, it was going to double the cost of printing this. And this is already like a $14 pattern, and I didn't want it to be more expensive and double the price. So I have those same cutting charts online on my website as a resource. So if you want to go print those off and follow along with that, you can, but you can certainly just cut according to how it's listed out in the pattern without having that picture reference. So I will link that in the video below, and I will also put it in the email that I send out that goes with this these cutting steps. So anyways, I just wanted to show you that before I get going. And then I think what I'll do is I'm going to walk you through a little bit of the cutting on this step. Just a couple of them are tricky. These 2 in particular, I want to point out the cutting on. So I will film that next.
Now, before I begin my cutting, I am taking my background fabric over to my ironing station and giving it a good steam. This helps getting everything laying nice and flat and takes care of any pre-shrinkage. Now I'm working on my background and just cutting the strips that the pattern calls for, and then subcutting into smaller sections. There's quite a few background pieces here to keep track of, so I just made sure to mark everything as I went through, and then I'm going to get out my little labels and put the step numbers on each piece, and that will help me keep track of everything.
Now I want to walk through cutting the background with you for the big quilt, page 3 and 4, and that's what goes with this diagram right here. So I have my fabric pressed and ready to go, and what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to open up your fabric so it's a single layer. We're not going to cut this double because these pieces we just need one of. So get that smoothed out, then you can go ahead and square off a corner to start working from. I've already squared up this edge, so I'm just going to work my way this direction. And then you're going to need 2 rulers for this. So we are going to do steps A to B. So we're going to be cutting first our 20 3/4 inch square. Now the largest square that I have is 15 inches. So to get to that 20 3/4, I can borrow 5 3/4 from this ruler. So I'm laying them next to each other. I have 15 plus 5 3/4. And then I can go ahead and make that cut here. And I can do the same thing the other direction. So sometimes these big corners can be just a little tricky, but this is all you need to do. Thank goodness there's only one. So there's our big square. Now we're going to take our long ruler and we are going to cut this in half diagonally once. And again, we're going to maybe have to put 2 rulers together unless you have a longer one than what I have. I've got my 6 by 24 and another 6 by 12 laying next to each other so I can make that diagonal cut. Now this one I can label with step A or piece A. Pattern will tell you what step. It's actually step 36. So I'm going to put A36 on there. Set that one off to the side. Now one thing to mention, because this is cut across the threads that are going these 2 directions, this is all bias and very stretchy. So you don't want to stretch that out as you're working with it or cutting. If you are one who didn't want to worry about the bias as much or deal with it, you could spray starch first. You'd want to spray starch your whole piece before you cut it out. And there are like 3 different levels of starching. Mary Ellen's Best Press would be the lightest. Magic sizing would be kind of a medium weight, and Stay Flow starch would be a heavyweight. And that's where you would put it in, like it's kind of all the rage on Instagram where people will put it in a weed tank sprayer and totally saturate their fabric and then let it dry, and then it's very stiff, and then you don't have to worry about that bias stretching as much. I feel like I'm pretty used to dealing with bias, so it doesn't bother me so much, so I did not starch, but feel free to do what you want to do. So now we're going to go on to cutting the B part of this diagram. So if you look at the picture in your pattern, it tells us we're going to cut 1 inch off of this edge right here. So I'm just going to turn that so it's a little easier for me to work with, and then I'm going to take my ruler, line it up along the 1 inch edge, and make that cut, and this is a scrap. So now this is the correct size, but according to the picture, we need to cut this in half diagonally here. So you're going to want to make sure your ruler is lined up with the edge of the navy so that you're not, cutting it kittywampus. We need a 90-degree corner here, and then it's going to run off through the tip of this point right here, and you'll make a cut like that. And now these 2 are to be labeled with a B, and they are for step 35. So I'm just going to take my little note and my pen and mark that. So I want to show you just one more, and that is triangles C and D. So we've got our other section of fabric here that we can work from. I'm just going to check and make sure that I'm still square. do a little trim if I need to. So there I've got that square corner to work from. Now this one is going to be 18 3/4. So again, we need to borrow a little bit of a few inches from our ruler next door. So we've got 15 inches here and 3 3/4 here to get to our 18 3/4 inches. We're going to do the same thing over here. So again, this gives you a chance to practice cutting those big squares and cutting them accurately. Okay, there is our 18 3/4 inch square. Now again, we're going to cut it in half diagonally once, and my one ruler again isn't quite long enough, so grab another ruler, line those up perfectly even with each other and with the two tips of the corners there, and then you can make this cut all the way across. This one is going to be labeled C, and then we're going to work on trimming this one. So we need to trim 2 3/8 off of this side. So I'm just going to turn that so it's easier for me, and then we're going to go 2 3/8 and trim, and then leave this large like this. This one's going to be labeled with a D. So I think the other steps in the pattern are all pretty easy to do. There's a little bit smaller squares. Some are cut diagonally twice, some are cut diagonally once. And the reason some are cut once and some are cut twice is because it gets your bias on a different side. So for example, this triangle that we went this way, the bias is all along the long side. If I would have cut it diagonally twice, there would have been biases on two sides, and this would have been straight of grain out here, and that's going to go along the outside edge of our quilt. So this is going to come into play a little bit more about the bias placement when we get to the assembly later on. Okay everyone, that's a wrap on my hints for cutting and getting us started for the sew along. So just spend the next few weeks cutting and working through whatever version of the pattern you're making, and then meet me back here on January 4th where we will kick off the sewing. We're going to start simple, and we're going to make these little teal daisy blocks first. In the meantime, if you have any questions, you can leave them for me in the comments, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. But happy cutting, and we'll see you here in a few weeks.